What first got me interested in parent support or parent education was that I was a high school teacher and girls athletic coach. And I love working with adolescents. But the more I got to know these students, these kids, I realized how much their parents really needed support too.
Mhm.
And then in our own family, we had a child develop an eating disorder. And before that happened, I thought I knew a lot about eating disorders. I thought I knew how to spot them, how to try to prevent them, and I really knew just enough to be dangerous. So I had to
Mm.
learn a lot the hard way, and it's become my passion to help other parents learn an easier way. So if I can help, lower the risk for someone's child to develop an eating disorder, like that gives that purpose to that suffering that we went through as a family.
All right. So today we're going to be talking about dad's roles in supporting a healthy relationship with food and body. And to do that, I have an outstanding guest for you today. So I have Oona Hanson, and she helps parents and guardians raise kids who have a healthy relationship with food and their body. And in addition to her private practice as a parent coach, Oona also works as a family mentor at Equip, which is an eating disorder treatment program. Oona holds a master's degree in educational psychology and a master's in English, and her work has been featured widely, including places like CNN, USA Today, Good Morning America, US News and World Report, Today, and People, and then now the Men's Intuition podcast. So we are excited to be able to have you on today, Oona. So welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, so why don't we just dive in and maybe you can tell us anything else about yourself that you'd like to share and kind of what it is that fuels your passion for your work as a parent coach, specifically in the area of relationship with food, body image, and eating disorder recovery.
Yeah. So, what first got me interested in parent support or parent education was that I was a high school teacher and girls athletic coach. And I love working with adolescents. But the more I got to know these students, these kids, I realized how much their parents really needed support too.
Mhm.
And then in our own family, we had a child develop an eating disorder. And before that happened, I thought I knew a lot about eating disorders. I thought I knew how to spot them, how to try to prevent them, and I really knew just enough to be dangerous. So I had to
Mm.
learn a lot the hard way, and it's become my passion to help other parents learn an easier way. So if I can help, lower the risk for someone's child to develop an eating disorder, like that gives that purpose to that suffering that we went through as a family. And we can't prevent every eating disorder. I wish that we could.
Mhm.
But I think getting this education about eating disorders, about diet culture, about weight stigma, about food rules, it also helps families just have more peaceful meal times, more connection. And in the unfortunate, event of a child developing an eating disorder, a family with this kind of education is going to spot that much faster and get the help they need sooner, which, again, is going to help make outcomes more favorable sooner. So I'm all about prevention, early detection, and then giving parents the information they need if their child, is facing that serious illness.
Yeah, that's great. And that I think that's often the case is that our lived experience is often what drives our passions for things like this. It's experiencing it and going through it without that understanding before. And I kind of think back to my attitude toward mental health before my first wife passed away in 2010 was very much if you're depressed, just stop being depressed, kind of a mindset that I'm quite embarrassed about. But when you go through it, it suddenly you experience it in a different way, and it opens your eyes to a bit more of the reality of the situation, and then you have a more empathy, compassion, understanding, and then are able to kind of help others through that. And I think that's great that that's what you're doing. I actually had a different question, but right now, it just popped in my mind that I'd like to address. It's you said that there's we can't prevent all eating disorders, and I think there's this misconception that when a child develops an eating disorder, that it's the parent's fault in a lot of ways. And maybe we can start off by talking about that before we go into this, because I want to make sure I don't forget to get that one out there.
Yeah, I think it's a very powerful myth in our culture, and it was perpetuated by treatment professionals for a long time, right?
Hmm.
The assumption was that parents, especially mothers, were to blame if their child developed an eating disorder. Children were removed from their homes, kind of as like a general rule. Let's give
Hmm.
them treatment, and really cutting families out of the process. That's gotten a lot better, but I think there's still vestiges of that belief floating around in our culture.
Hmm.
And you know, I've known many people who had an eating disorder who very much felt that their parents played a role in the development of their eating disorder. So I'm not saying that someone's individual experience wasn't shaped
Right.
by something that happened at home. And for some people, it's an important part of the healing process to kind of identify, blame, maybe forgive,
Hmm.
right? Um, but as someone who works in the field of supporting parents, I don't really see an upside as a general rule to assume parents are at fault.
Hmm.
Parents are always doing the best they can, and especially for adolescents with eating disorders, parent involvement or guardian involvement, family involvement can be crucial to recovery. So if parents feel like, did I cause this? It's going to be harder for them to kind of activate and feel motivated and empowered to help their child recover.
Hmm.
So it's nuanced.
Yeah.
I think we do know that, a family environment can shape beliefs around food, can shape beliefs around the importance of physical appearance or athletic performance. So parents do have an influence. But I wouldn't draw a straight line from like a
Hmm.
parent causing a child's eating disorder. If I'm going to put blame anywhere, it's on our culture, on weight stigma, on diet culture, on the pressures that parents feel to convey what they think are helpful messages about food
Hmm.
and bodies that actually end up backfiring in terms of the child's health.
Yeah, that's a great way to put that. I think that's so important that to understand it is very nuanced, because it's very easy to look at these things in the black and white, in a black and white way, whether it's the blame is all on the parent, or that the blame is all on the child, and that it's that they've done all of these things wrong, when there's so many factors that can come into play. And that's true for mental health. When you have children who end up developing mental health issues that aren't eating disorder, because eating disorders are a mental health issue, but any kind of mental health issue, it's not necessarily your fault. But at the same time, it's good to identify those things that maybe we can change, and that we can begin to approach in a different way. And so I guess that's kind of what I want to focus the rest of our conversation on, is kind of what it is that we can do to help without harming, and maybe undo some of the things that maybe we've done in a way that wasn't conducive to a positive, healthy relationship with food and body, and all of those kinds of things. And then specifically, kind of what us dads can do if there's some specific things that you've encountered in your work with parents. So, what are some of the biggest challenges that you face when working with a family, when first starting to work with a family?
I mean, I think it's diet culture and weight stigma.
Hmm.
I think that is the underlying kind of force that drives a lot of the rules about food, fears about food, um, beliefs about exercise, and so it's really these larger cultural forces that
Hmm.
can feel kind of overwhelming. And I know we can all start to make changes, unlearn some things, and make our homes more of a safe haven from those forces, and educate ourselves and our kids about how to navigate the real world. Because we can't bubble wrap our kids
Hmm.
from weight stigma or diet culture. I mean, you'd have to live in a cave, I guess. Um, which I guess that's an option, but for the most of us, we're gonna want to really give our kids the tools to navigate, the comment from the coach or the teacher or the grandparent or maybe a co-parent, right? Maybe you're in two households,
Hmm.
kind of how we navigate that. So, um, yeah, to your point about any mental illness, I think it is natural for parents to wonder, like, what did I do? Um, and I think I would never blame a parent. And I know every parent who has a child develop a mental illness has to learn a lot of new skills to help their child.
Mhm.
So it's not like, oh, I can't affect this at all. Like there's nothing I can do. Throw out my hands. Let me leave it to the professionals. And there are times where you have to do that in a crisis situation. But for ongoing healing and recovery, parents are going to have to learn things and make changes, and that can be really uncomfortable. So finding support, a community, whether that's an online community, a real, your friends that are kind of on the same journey with you,
Mhm.
whether it's, Facebook groups, things like that. I think finding that support and community so you're not swimming upstream all by yourself.
Yeah, I love what you said about making the home a safe space. So making the home that place where the diet culture stuff is almost non-existent as much as possible, because knowing that they're going to be going out in the world exposed to it on a constant basis, probably not comfortable necessarily going against the flow, especially for teenagers. And they're just trying to not make waves in many cases, not stand out too much. And so having that place at home where they just don't have to worry about somebody questioning their body size or their food choices or their relationship with exercise or all those kinds of things seems like such a powerful thing, which is unfortunately absent in a lot of homes. And like you said, it's not necessarily the fault of the parents. We're just conditioned to think that way. We're all conditioned to think that, well, bigger bodies are not healthy, smaller bodies are healthier, that this is the way, these foods are good for you, these foods are bad for you. And so it can be really difficult to know how to navigate that. Um, are there any specific common challenges or obstacles that you encounter when getting dads in particular on board with the kind of the implementation of different recommendations and strategies and really it's like setting up this safe space at home?
Yeah, it's a great question. And let's call it the fact that I'm a mom, I'm a woman talking
Hmm.
about this. This is my perspective from the dads I've worked with over the years.
Hmm.
And so I realized we might have to fall into some generalizations. So I just want to call that out that everything we talk about here may not apply to every dad. But I hope there's some nuggets that resonate with folks listening.
Yeah. Well, let me
And
just
if
say,
not,
let me just say real quick, I think that the female perspective on this is often really helpful because us guys can tend to be in a guy echo chamber, and just like women, I think can have that when they have a another perspective come in. I think that can be so helpful, and that's one of the reasons why I specifically wanted you, because I know that you'd bring that great perspective. So didn't mean to cut you off, but I just wanted to
yeah, no, thanks.
emphasize that there.
Yeah, thanks. I think one of the challenges, and I know you've talked about this, is that a lot of moms are coming into these discussions with kind of decades of practice talking about why
Mhm.
diets don't work and body image, that women are given a vocabulary, right, and a permission to talk about these challenges. For men, that's less common, right? To express body image distress, like when you're hanging out with the guys, like that's probably not going to be, a typical conversation. I think
Mhm.
as guys get into middle age, sometimes there's self-deprecating humor, right? About like, oh, I've got the dad bod now, or
Mhm.
you know, what have you. But it's not necessarily a vulnerable conversation where guys are supporting each other through this. And so women just have more practice talking about these things. And also, women have been targeted by diet and wellness culture like our whole lives. And for a lot of men, again, depending on the age, um, this might be a more recent experience, right? The diet and wellness culture, I would say in the last 20 years, really has like realized, oh my gosh, there's like half the population we could be making money off of. Like, we're not going to call it a diet, we're going to call it biohacking or
Yeah.
performance enhancing or intermittent fasting. Um, we're going to package the same, you know, powders and shakes in a black container with like big X's on it. Like it's this very like athletic performance, masculine thing to
Mhm.
do. And that's relatively new outside of like the maybe bodybuilding world, like
Mhm.
from the 80s.
Yeah.
Um, so, and what's interesting is the messaging to men over these last 20 years has been hasn't been about appearance as much. It's been about wellness, performance, longevity. Um, and so it can feel like, oh, yeah, this makes sense. Like, I'm interested in the science of this. I'm like, I want to optimize my health. Like, who wouldn't? Whereas women, again, in general, you know, like have been on the cabbage soup diet, slim fast, the special K, dieting for prom. And then wellness culture came in and made it seem like, oh, it's good for your health. But it's like we kind of knew all along. This is just the same thing repackaged,
Mhm.
and we're kind of over it. Like we're sick of it. So in some ways, women are just coming in with more experience, maybe eyes wider open to kind of this shape shifting marketing of diets.
Mhm.
And see it as like as a social issue, right? It's not this sort of like gender inequality issue, right? That women have been kind of, the appearance focus has been so prevalent. Now there's definitely appearance pressures on men too, and I
Mhm.
think that has really exploded during this wellness
Yeah.
culture, performance culture piece, and we're seeing that in more and more boys developing eating disorders,
Mhm.
and men, adult men as well. So men knowing that, look, I might be coming to this with less background knowledge, less prior experience, less of a comfort level. I don't have all the words for all of these things. So giving yourself a lot of grace and knowing, like, like kind of being dropped. Like if diet culture is like the planet we've been living on, when you start learning about anti-diet, intuitive eating, and health at every size, it's like a whole nother planet. And you're learning a new language, a new
Mhm.
framework, a new culture. So give yourself grace. Like you wouldn't learn a new language overnight. And I know, again, for like maybe a guy who's feeling sort of competitive, I want to get this right. That can be really uncomfortable, right? That there's going to be this sort of like awkward phase of,
Mhm.
you know, going kind of back and forth between these two planets.
Well, everything you said there just really resonates with what I hear from the guys that I work with and in our community group that we have and in one-on-one conversations. And is that language, that how to express that. Um, we it manifests. We talk about the same kinds of body image issues that I talked about with women when I was working with men and women mainly, which actually at the time was mostly women because they were the ones looking for help until I really emphasized working with men. But they manifest differently. There's usually that's something else driving it, their body dissatisfaction, and so it's really interesting how I think it's important what you pointed out there with the vocabulary. I think that's a big part of it, to learning how to express that, and and it's going so much against what other guys are talking about. That whole, you don't want to be a beta. Oh my gosh, you're everybody's supposed to be an alpha male, right? And if you're not, then you're talked about as being a beta, and that's like this bad thing. And you have things like 75 hard, which it's not that there's no value in developing discipline and determination and grit and that kind of thing, but when it's emphasized at such a level, and that if you aren't aspiring to that, then you're a beta, that kind of a thing. Just as over and over, this idea is perpetuated. And I think one of the other things that makes it challenging for men is that so many of the voices in this space talking about these are are women. I mean, I learned everything I know about intuitive eating and health at every size and the non-diet approach from women, and maybe Aaron Flores. I mean, that's basically, that's kind of like the one guy that I think I learned some things from, and then a few other guys that I interacted with over the course of time. But in general, it's been all women, and they're talking from a female perspective, and I think that can be really difficult for a lot of guys. Have they expressed that to you too, when maybe working with dads initially, especially?
Yeah, and I think it's mostly white women.
Yeah,
It's
true.
mostly thin white women, right?
That's true.
So diet culture even seeps into the anti-diet space, right?
Hmm.
Just because of the structure of our culture. Um, yeah, I mean, I find working in eating disorder treatment, as you can imagine, the field is very female dominated. And it's one of the reasons I love that at Equip, for instance, we have, in addition to all kinds of support groups for parents and guardians, we also have a weekly men's group
Oh,
that's
good.
just for dads and other male caregivers. Um, and and I think having that space is especially important because most of their other interactions with an eating disorder treatment program for their child is going to be with women.
Mhm.
So it's really a great safe space for men to ask the questions that they may be thinking like, is this the wrong thing to say? But in this space, they're safe to ask those questions and get support and really build skills, right?
Mhm.
Um, I think becoming anti-diet or body positive can feel very like amorphous. Like, what does that mean? And having really concrete skills of what to say it, how to stay calm in the moment. I think that is helpful to everyone. And I think for especially a lot of men can really feel like, okay, I get that I can work through these skills and support my child better. And of course, Feast, the parent organization for families of kids with eating disorders, also has a men's group as well. So for any dads out there, if you have a child struggling with an eating disorder, there's sort of dad specific support out there, and I hope you can access.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's great to know that those are available because I've talked in my men's group with some of the guys and they've shared how nice it is to have a men's group talking about these things because some of them have been involved in other groups, but they were literally the only guy and they felt like they were welcomed. They were certainly welcomed in, but they were only allowed at a certain depth and not intentionally, but it was just they felt like they were only allowed to get to a certain level with the other women because there were certain things that they couldn't relate to, and there's those walls I think between us at different times where we just feel more comfortable in an environment that kind of comes from that same understanding. I mean, we see it with ethnicities and all kinds of things, different cultural things, religions, all of those kinds of things. There's a certain place where you feel much more relaxed and comfortable when you're around those that have very similar life experiences, shared beliefs, and all of those kinds of things. So, yeah, it's great to hear
Exactly.
that.
Yeah.
I'll make sure to put some links to those things in the show notes. Also, have you seen any differences when the child or the children that are in the household, maybe that where they have the concerns, whether they're male or female? Like, are dads more or less concerned with sons versus daughters? Or I was kind of curious about that.
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask that question, and I've been thinking about it for a few days. I think it's so context specific. So, and it really, a lot of this comes down to sort of these body hierarchies that we've been taught, right?
Hmm.
So, um, you know, one thing in terms of recovery from an eating disorder, weight restoration is obviously a really, for most people is a really important part of the process. And
Hmm.
um, regardless of kind of where you fall on the spectrum of weight, right? It's almost always an important part. And, um, dads feel protective of their kids, right? As all parents
Hmm.
do. And I think, um, you know, it might be easier for some dads to support their son to gain more weight, especially if they've got like, okay, he's going to get stronger and he's
Hmm.
going to be bigger because that's prized for a lot of men. Um, I think they can have a harder time supporting, again, many exceptions to this, but
Right,
can be
right.
harder to support helping their daughter restore weight because they're afraid that it's going to make things harder for her. Um, and so that's sort of one difference I've seen. But I will say dads have such a powerful impact on all of their kids' body image. And I think dads have been kind of written off, right? That this is like the sort of like social emotional things and food, that's like mom's job. And obviously I'm talking like about a very
Oh yeah,
heteronormative home environment
yeah.
here, but that sense of like dads might feel like, what role do I even have to play here? And I mean, obviously, anyone listening to this podcast doesn't feel that way, but I hope they can spread the word that, like, look, a dad who's making fun of his beer belly, or who says, like, I've got to, like you said, get to CrossFit, or like the world's going to end. That making those comments, even about their own body, that's affecting their kids of all genders in
Mhm.
their home. So, really knowing that you make a big impact, how you relate to food and body, how you relate to exercise. And again, nothing against CrossFit, like per se.
Yeah.
But I think dads might see their personal fitness project as like separate from the family. It's like this thing I'm doing
Mhm.
for myself. And you have to acknowledge that it's having an impact. And it's really your relationship with those activities that are the most important, the way you talk about them. It's not whether or not you're going to the gym. It's how do you talk about going to the gym? If you can't go, does it ruin your day? Do you say you can't have dessert because you didn't,
Mhm.
you missed your training session or what have you? Um, so it's really about the language you're using and sort of the energy that you have around that thing. So it's something to examine. And again, just the bottom line, dads have an impact on, you know, kids of all genders in their home.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that modeling aspect is so important, and it's really easy to overlook that. I've heard lots of parents just talk about things as if their kids, it just goes over their head, or maybe they're young, because I think it's easy to think that, oh, well, kids that are in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, they're not paying attention to that stuff. When in reality, they are watching very closely, and we've seen there's some research showing at very early ages, girls and boys too, but girls in particular are already starting to feel like their body is too big and that they need to lose weight when they're 7 or 8, 9 years old, wanting to go on diets. Actually, just had one of the guys was talking about recently a um, a friend that they have just saw what their son was looking up on the iPad the other day, and he was looking up dieting and and he's 10 years old. So a 10-year-old boy was actually looking up how to diet and lose weight specifically, and he had no idea that that was even on the kid's radar. And so it's amazing. And I think that what you said there about the we often don't think of dads as having that same nurturing role, that same emotional responsibility to developing that in the family and in their kids as a normal dad thing, but it should be. We should be just as involved in the feeding of our kids as mom. Obviously, breastfeeding makes that's a little bit different picture there, but in general, I think that we should.
Yeah, and I think, dads, getting involved in the kitchen with kids and
Hmm.
cooking with kids, like can just be so powerful. Like my husband is an incredible cook and, loves to teach the kids about food and skills in the kitchen. And there's so many ways that the dads can connect around food and just enjoying food together. Like you don't have to cook. This could be frozen pizza. But just connecting with our kids over meals. I think that was one of the things, during the first year of the pandemic, how many
Hmm.
dads thought, wow, like having breakfast, lunch, and dinner with my kids every day was pretty amazing. So I think more and more, again, a gender stereotype that might
Yeah.
have been less likely for them before. But, um, I think a lot of dads have really seen like how much joy and connection came out of those meals, and even though things are somewhat back to normal or mostly back to normal now,
Hmm.
I think prioritizing family meals or, can be family time going out for ice cream, just eating together with kids and enjoying food and each other's company. Like that's a huge way for dads to have a positive effect on their child's relationship with their body, with food. And we're not counting the calories. We're not counting macros. We're just enjoying the food, and having good conversation. And I mean, that's a skill dads already have, right?
Hmm.
Just hanging out with your kids and enjoying food together. I mean, that can go a really long way.
Yeah, that's great. And I've had several guys come to me to work on their relationship with food, and it's interesting to see that there are a lot of guys that are really interested in making sure that their kids don't end up in the same spot that they are with theirs. In fact, a number of them have turned around a lot of our time to work on, hey, what can I do with my kids instead of focused in on just them. And I think that's been really cool to see that, because as we're working on their relationship with food and their body and that kind of thing, they're saying, hey, well, what can I do with my kids, or my kids are struggling in this area. Do you have any advice for that? And so that's been really cool to see them actually start really take that interest in it. And I guess any guy who's listening to this, I would hope that they would that to me, that is a very manly thing to do. And I guess part of that is I was the kind of household that I was raised in with my dad. He was very much a nurturing, caring, compassionate person, but he was extremely strong. This is a person who literally never raised his voice at me or my mom ever. But you just couldn't help but respect him, and everyone around him respected him, and yet he didn't match what society typically calls a man's man kind of thing, but yet that's what he was. And I think that more men would really benefit their families if they would nurture those aspects of their character and how they interact with their kids to really help with this. um we talked a little bit about the dad's relationship with food and exercise and body and stuff, but I was kind of curious, have you seen any things like their relationship with their work life or leisure time or anything like that impact the other members of the family in the area of food and body image? So it's easy to say, okay, well, focus in on how I talk about food and stuff, but not really go beyond that. Do you see those other areas as potential areas to address too?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to the fitness or gym pressure. I think um, you know definitely parents all need more leisure time to
Hmm.
spend time not doing work or not taking care of a home or family. Um, I think I would encourage dads, if all of your leisure time is exercise, um, to take a look at that,
Hmm.
right? And for some dads, it's a really big part of their identity. Maybe they run a couple marathons a year, or maybe, to me, there's a difference between that and say, oh, like maybe you're doing it in a running group, right? So when there's a social aspect, I think obviously that can have a different flavor to it.
Hmm.
Um, but I think just looking at maybe how, if there's a rigidity to an exercise routine, like can dads show they can be flexible? Um, you know, maybe it's, there's a birthday party, like maybe dad misses, that whatever,
Hmm.
to take their kid to the party instead of mom, right? Just to show that exercise. And I'm picking exercise because I think that tends to be like, that's the weekend warrior, like that is often what adults have to, like, we have to find the time to exercise on the weekends. But when that is always the sort of like, that's the sacred thing that kind of gets in the way of other family time, I think just something to look at, like, is there some flexibility you can build into that or include your kids? Like maybe it doesn't have to be a physical activity that you can easily quantify or track. Maybe it's just shooting hoops in the driveway with your kid or going on a family walk or hike, to include the kids in that activity. But it's not a like, I have to move my body or else, or like that burn and earn mentality. So that's what comes to mind when I hear that question.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that's as you were talking about like the kid's birthday party thing, something that came to mind for me was it okay, so you can't, you don't do your workout at the normal time. You go ahead and go to the other event. But I think a lot of times we make up for it. So we go later. So we make sure that we don't miss it and we kind of maneuver things around so we don't miss it instead of showing them that, you know what, it's okay to do that. I mean, obviously, if you're an Olympic athlete in training, even then though, missing a workout is not going to make or break you. But I think it's really easy for us to get caught up in that mentality too, where it's, yeah, I'm flexible, but I still won't ever miss, and that kind of a thing. Last night was a good example for me personally. I had ninja, which I love. I look forward to it every week, and I had a ninja class last night. But my nephews and brother-in-law and sister-in-law came over for dinner, and I just missed it. They were like, "Oh, you have ninja pretty soon, don't you?" And I said, "No, I'm not going tonight. I'm eating hot dogs, hamburgers, and ice cream." So that was what I did instead, and I'm glad I did. It was a great time, and I think that that's a good perspective to have on that.
Yeah, modeling that flexibility and
Hmm.
um, yeah, and again, not to, I'm all about, I used to coach sports. I was an
Yeah.
athlete. I love to move my body. I'm not
Hmm.
saying like stop exercising if it's something you enjoy. Like, yeah, it's really about finding that balance or that flexibility.
Yeah, I think so. Well, not to kind of overgeneralize, but a lot of us guys, me, a lot of us like specific things to do, not to do, that kind of thing. And, understanding that there's no right way or to do things. Obviously, there's nuance in every family and every situation. I'm sure that there's some things that apply to many of us, but what are some specific things that dads should avoid doing to help establish a safe home, healthy home? And then what are some things that dads can kind of begin to specifically do? Maybe just some your favorite top tips, I guess might be a good way to put it.
I'm thinking about when you were talking about your dad and the respect that he kind of earned from the family. I think because of the way a lot of us were raised, if kids aren't eating certain things at the table, or or are cleaning their plate or whatever it is, I think dads can feel like that's a sign of disrespect, right? Like,
Hmm.
hey, I've prepared this meal. This is what's for dinner, and if you don't eat the way I think you should eat, that's a sign of disrespect. And I understand that perspective, and I would encourage dads to think about let's try to focus this on respecting your child's body,
Hmm.
trusting their own body, listening to their intuition, their inner wisdom, and knowing that they can trust that we give them that unconditional love and positive regard, again, regardless of what they look like, how much they eat, like all these things that they know they can always count on us to be there for them, and that it
Hmm.
doesn't become this kind of power struggle at the dinner table, which I think is a tendency in a lot of homes, right? That maybe it's maybe it's not the clean plate club. Because I think a lot of us had that when we were kids. A lot of parents were like, I don't want to do that to my kid. Um, but there may be, you have to finish your broccoli before you can have dessert, right? Or
Hmm.
maybe the pressure is more subtle. Maybe it's like, well, if you want to be strong, you're going to have to eat more protein, right? And it's sort of like this more subtle pressure.
Hmm.
Um, and I think one thing that dads can think about is think about the power dynamic between you as the father and your child at the table. And thinking about concepts like consent and bodily autonomy, right?
Hmm.
And what you want your kids thinking if they're in a situation where their body's telling them one thing, someone bigger and stronger and more powerful is telling them another, who do you want them to listen to? Do you want to set the stage where you can kind of pressure or overpower someone to do something they don't want to do?
Hmm.
And obviously, this can have all kinds of implications for relationships, right, in the future. And so that would be, I know maybe that was like a really heavy topic to bring up, but I think
No, not at all.
um, framing it as like, what strengths do you want your child to have? And how can you start to foster them? So, like, even things that are happening at the dinner table extend far beyond, that meal. Like, these are
Hmm.
really life skills that you're passing along. So, the shorter version of that is, if you're used to sort of having to use bribes or threats or pressure to get your kids to eat, I think that's something to get some support with. And figuring out ways, whether it's through the concept of the division of responsibility that I know you
Hmm.
talk about, fostering intuitive eating, maybe giving some more structure but without restriction in the way you're feeding your kids, and sit with that discomfort, right? Like, oh my gosh, they didn't eat their steak, but I still let them have ice cream. Like, what does that mean about me as a
Hmm.
parent, right? You're going to be uncomfortable. So kind of prepare for that if you're going to make some of these changes.
Yeah, I think it's where we need to really evaluate what things are moral issues and discipline issues and things that need to be addressed in that from that context, because obviously I know that you're not saying just let your kids do whatever they want and just listen to their body, and if they don't feel like doing what you've asked them to, just let them. I know that's not at all what you're saying, um, but at the same time we need to be intentional so that they do learn that in and understand in those different contexts. When a boss is pressuring them to do something that's not appropriate or that's illegal, or when a romantic relationship or a friendship where they're being pressured to do something or to stay in that relationship when they know it's really not good for them. And I think that it's really easy for us as parents to just make everything black and white. Do what I tell you when I tell you. If I tell you to do this, then you need to just do it, instead of thinking, well, how is that going to develop them into a strong, self-supportive adult that's going to be able to stand up to injustices and to negativity, be resilient, but at the same time also do what needs to be done when there is an authority figure over them. And I think that can be a really difficult place to work. But I think one of the cool things with food is that I I I think we often moralize it, and it's one of those things that we can pretty much take that off and say, there's other areas where we can address these, like you need to do what you're told when you're told to do it. But around food, I think I'm rambling a little bit here, but I'm kind of thinking with the food thing, is that it's not disrespectful if your kid doesn't like your cooking. I mean, that's not, but to think that it is, I think it's missing a big part of that equation there.
Right, right. And kind of threatening them or pressuring them to eat it anyway
Mm-hmm.
is there, that comes at a cost, right? So yeah, maybe they ate that meal, but what was the cost to the relationship, to their trust in their body, to their trust in you? And yeah, I think, not taking it personally, like you said, it's not about you, but, and I take your point too. It's not like, your 2-year-old's like, but my body doesn't want to take a nap.
Yeah.
There are boundaries where we're going to be, we're the parent, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think of, hunger and fullness. You can never know someone else's hunger and
Yeah.
fullness. A 2-year-old can't always know their fatigue level either, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
where they need, really young kids do need that structure.
Right.
But you also can't make someone fall asleep, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can set the stage for lights out at 8 p.m. for your, elementary school kid or whatever. You can't actually make them fall asleep, right? You can again set the environment. So I think of, with hunger and fullness, it's a little bit like, having to use the bathroom, right? You can't know, or how thirsty someone is. Like, you can't actually know what someone else is experiencing in their body. And we can create structure without restriction that creates a good framework that's going to make family life go a little more smoothly,
Mm-hmm.
but still letting the ultimate decision around food rest with the child.
Yeah. Yeah. It kind of parallels, I think, emotions. You can't, you don't know what's truly going on inside your kid's head. You're not sad. Just, stop being sad. Stop feeling that way. You shouldn't feel that way, when in reality, they do. And we need to help them learn how to work around those feelings, work with those feelings, and sit with them and deal with them and work their way through them, instead of telling them not to feel that way or to stop it. And I think it's really easy for us to demand a certain behavior, see that behavior, and then be satisfied that what is appearing in front of us is good, when in reality there's so much under that, behind the scenes, that's being suppressed, instead of really addressing it from a strategic and an intentional perspective as a parent.
Yeah, and as you're talking, I'm thinking about one of my favorite lines about parenting and setting boundaries, and that is conveying to kids that all emotions are welcome,
Mm-hmm.
but all behaviors are not,
Yeah, I love
right?
that.
That like
Mm-hmm.
that, anger, welcome, let me hear it. But maybe you have rules about we don't slam doors or we don't call each other names, or like you have family boundaries about the
Mm-hmm.
expression or the behaviors around that. But really welcoming emotions. And I think going back to sort of the gender stereotypes that a lot of us have grown up with, a lot of men weren't given permission to express a full range of emotions when they were
Mm-hmm.
growing up. There's one emotion that men and boys have always been given permission to express, and that's anger,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think a lot of times, to your point about like your dad never raising his voice, for a lot of men that I've worked with, their fear around their child's eating disorder or body image issues, or their sadness about what's happening to their child, comes out as anger,
Hmm.
because that's sort of the avenue that they're used to expressing hard feelings through. So that's sort of like a maybe deeper work for a lot of men to kind of
Hmm.
build their own like emotional range and vocabulary. And there are a lot of things that, they haven't been given permission to express or to feel.
Hmm.
It's a process.
Yeah. Well, and it's really interesting. We just had this conversation in our men's group and about this, and one person was expressing how they've never felt comfortable expressing anger, like that was an emotion that they weren't supposed to express. And I think, and then it was interesting. I'd never even thought of it myself, and I realized that it wasn't that I wasn't allowed to, but I always I always felt like expressing anger wasn't really something that we should ever do. Because, well, for one, I didn't see it in my dad, but I also know that he wasn't suppressing anger. When he was angry about something, you knew it. He just didn't raise his voice to express it. But at the same time, I at 51, I just now realized that I actually don't allow myself to express anger. I always minimize it when I'm having a difficult conversation with somebody. I always kind of tiptoe around what I'm really trying to get through to them. My my daughter, she says, she still says it at 25. She tells me I'm a pushover, which I am, and I think that that's part of what's happened with that. And hey, I'm much less than I used to be, but at the same time, it's really interesting to explore that. So I think the generalization of having this wide range of emotions that we're comfortable expressing, that vocabulary that you talked about is so important. And doing that deeper work. I know, some of the guys I work with have therapists also, and I think that that's super helpful for them, not just to deal with food, but if that's an area where you feel like you're struggling as a parent, that may be another avenue to pursue too, maybe even before working on your relationship with food.
Yeah, and I think so much of this is almost can be reparenting ourselves, right?
Hmm.
As we're, whatever our parents weren't able to give to us, we can, it sounds kind of, maybe a little corny or a little woo woo, but
Hmm.
I've seen it happen, right? Where we
Hmm.
can give ourselves maybe the permission or the skills that now that we didn't get when we were young.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's important. Well, as we kind of get toward the end here and wrap up, I'd love to hear your thoughts because I know this probably applies to so many families since so many families are not your stereotype traditional mom and dad together and that kind of thing. So what are your thoughts about families and how they can navigate all of this when mom and dad are not together or mom, dad and dad, or when you have a blended family, those kinds of things. What are some ways that you've helped people and even challenges? Just maybe talk about that issue to some degree.
Yeah, I think where I've worked the most on this issue is around eating disorder recovery,
Hmm.
because, as you know, eating disorders can be very manipulative. Not the person with the eating disorder, but the eating disorder
Hmm.
itself as like this almost separate entity can be very manipulative and split, different parents, and that can happen under one roof. But when there's two separate households, there's even more room for the eating disorder to say, "Oh, but dad said I had enough today. I don't need to eat anymore." Or, "Oh, mom said I could swap, boost for dessert today." And,
Hmm.
the eating disorder is always looking for little kind of cracks in the system, right? That's trying to eradicate the eating disorder. What's really helped in those situations is using technology like a Google Doc to share, like, you know, here's what the parameters are that the treatment team has given us. We're going to log all the meals, and flag anything for the other parent, right?
Hmm.
So I've seen parents do incredible work. They agree on very few things, but when their child is in this health crisis,
Hmm.
really coming together and making sure they're presenting a united front around this particular issue. It doesn't have to mean everyone's doing things exactly the same way, but when it comes to like the bottom line of recovery, really, really being firm and supporting each other, again, presenting that parental alignment, even when you're not aligned on other things. I'm a big fan and for the sort of not an eating disorder, but just for, let's say, two households or a blended family where people are coming in with different food values or food beliefs.
Hmm.
I'm a fan of having the uncomfortable conversation, right? that, maybe parents saying, hey, it looks like we're kind of coming at this from two different angles. Let's talk about it. Not I'm right and you're wrong, because that
Mhm.
doesn't tend to go very well.
Right.
But like, where can, and expressing why you care about it. Like, it might sound like, as you know, I have an eating disorder history and I really, our kids are more genetically vulnerable. Let's talk about how we can protect them. Or, hey, have you heard rates of eating disorders of kids of all genders are skyrocketing? Like, you know, could we listen to the same podcast and talk about how we could
Mhm.
maybe lower the risk for our kids? So again, just, using those sort of common sense communication strategies to get things out in the open. I think the unsaid, like the elephant in the room or the walking on eggshells, I mean, that's a really awful way to live. And kids pick up on the unsaid or the unspoken tensions or secrets. Like, that's the scariest thing for them. So if you're at odds with, another adult in your child's life around food, like, your kids know that.
Mhm.
Let's talk, get some support. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And yeah, putting our own needs and interests aside in that and focusing the attention on the child through that. Obviously, it's not neglecting all of our own needs, but at the same time, it's maybe I've heard often parents are still planning to engage in their exercise activities or their diet that they've been on because they're perfectly fine with it or they feel like they are, but they've set that aside in the interest of making sure that the focus is on the child and what they're going through and what they need. So they're they relax on that, put it on the back burner and for a time at least, so that they can make sure that the kid's getting good modeling of relationship with food and all of those kinds of things. And I'm sure that's got to be just a really difficult area to navigate. It seems like it could drive a wedge between couples. But I can also see how it would have the exact opposite and pull them even tighter together. So I know I've heard stories of families becoming super strong through going through that experience together, and then also you hear the sad stories of breaking apart. So I think that advice that you gave today and on everything you talked about would be so helpful in helping the families to pull together rather than distance themselves.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No, yeah. So, well, how can people find more about you and if they'd like to work with you?
Yeah. So if parents realize they want some more one-on-one support, or maybe a
Mhm.
couple or co-parents want some support around talking about food, talking about bodies, even if an eating disorder isn't even on your radar, but you just realize, oh, I think we're kind of far apart, or we want to make
Mhm.
some changes and we want some support. That I also do that work. Or as you said, if an eating disorder, if there is a diagnosis and you're navigating treatment, things like that, that's also what I do. Um, so the best thing is to go to my website, which is just Oona at oonahanson.com. I
Mhm.
always say when in doubt, it's an O. So uh, oonahanson.com. And then I'm on most active on Instagram, and there I'm at Oona_Hanson. There's a baby named Oona Hanson out there. So if you see it's a baby, that's not me. Um, I also sometimes get pretty spicy on Twitter. I'm Oona Hanson there.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, I also have a small but growing private Facebook group called Parenting Without Diet Culture. So that's a place where parents can post questions and get support. And I drop in podcasts, articles, um, webinars and other events that I think are relevant to parents who are doing this work. So that's another place that folks can find me and get support.
Oh, great. Yeah. Lots of different options there. And that's great that you have different ways that people can depending on the means that they have available and all of that kind of thing. Cause that's definitely a challenging thing when you're already dealing with other things going on. So, yeah, well, thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom and your insight here with us. And it, it's been very eye opening and very helpful. And I've really greatly appreciated the work that you do and all of the free content that you share all the time. It's always, I would say, it's definitely some of the most helpful, practical, and stuff that's out there. So I highly encourage anybody who's listening to definitely give her a follow.
Thank you so much.